So next up is a panel discussion entitled The Business Impact of Behavioral Science. Should be really interesting engagement discussion with clients. Leading the discussion today is Stephen Springfield from Sentient Decision Science. Stephen leads the brand consulting division for Sentient, where he works with primary research from the Subconscious Research Lab, as well as the broader academic community, in order to apply the latest scientific human understanding to solve marketing problems. Stephen, I think, is really well equipped to lead this, moderate this panel, because he does hail from a rich client-side history, both Coca-Cola and PepsiCo, and Sentient is now lucky to have him working with us. I'm going to let him introduce his panel, but a fun fact about Stephen: he loves chess. He has at least 20 chess sets at home, which is 640 pieces, and he played nearly 3,000 games of chess this past year, which landed him on the cover of Chess Life magazine. That's not really true, but I'm supposed to keep you awake. Anyway. Just to set this panel discussion up, that's really, really important, I think, for both client side and vendor side of the fence. The advancement of behavioral sciences, I believe, has really reactivated almost two components. The first is what we've been talking about throughout this conference, and that is the innovative collaboration between researchers and insights professionals. But it's also, the second point, the influence and business impact those insights are able to make inside organizations, which is really paramount to understand. We, as a group, love to celebrate the first part because of its aspirational nature, what could be, and because whether we're a vendor, an agency, or a client, we're all kindred spirits. Number two is going to be as important, or maybe even more important, which is creating the pull. So this is going to be the focus of today's panel, and I'll let Steve take it over.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. No, I've got it. Wow, that was quite the introduction. Thank you. Those were 5-minute chess games, by the way, in case you think I'm just slopping off at the job. And then to tear down any facade that these are going to be extemporaneous questions, I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge that I'm holding a note card here. So let's start by just introducing our esteemed and diverse panel. So if you guys would just simply tell folks who you are and what your role is at your firm.
I'm Sarah Snudden at Keurig Dr. Pepper, and I work on the beverage insight space for innovation and the base brands, and thinking about delighting consumers through the Keurig brewing system.
I'm Kevin Perlmutter. I'm Chief of Innovation at a place called Man-Made Music. We're a global music and sound studio. We create iconic and enduring identities and experiences for brands like AT&T and products like Nissan electric vehicles and iRobot and entertainment companies like IIeX. I'm Chief of Innovation. I also lead a group called Venture Sonic, which is an incubator for music and sound prototypes and collaborations. And the reason why I'm here is because I lead our research capability, which is called Sonic Pulse Research, that we offer in partnership with Sentient.
Brian Laverty. I work for Turner Consumer Insights. So this is a corporate role. I report into corporate strategy. So we really kind of do macro-type consumer insights research across all of our networks. So from Cartoon Network all the way to CNN, we do it all.
I am Sandhu. I'm actually not on the client side. I'm on the research side. I work for Fresh Squeezed Ideas as the Vice President of Behavioral Science Insights and Strategies, so really looking to how can we bring behavioral science into the research space to help service clients like these.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right, thank you. So as you see, it's an esteemed and diverse panel, as promised, as advertised. And what we're going to do is, as is usual in these settings, is I'm going to direct a question to one of our panelists, but open it up to others, anyone who wants to follow up or have some color commentary. But I want to start with you, Raj. I think a lot of clients see behavioral science, behavioral research as perhaps an alternative, and hopefully a better alternative to sometimes more traditional measures and research techniques. But I wanted to ask, which business questions or business problems do you see for which behavioral research is a necessity, is required in order to do a good job answer those questions?
It's a really big question, and I think I'll start off by actually challenging the question itself. I think any business challenge requires a human interaction. So business challenges are always around motivating behavior, changing attitudes. There's some action that is required. And from my perspective as a behavioral scientist, as long as you are trying to understand or influence people, it should be always required that we're leveraging behavioral insights. If behavioral insights are coming from the massive field of psychology, then from my perspective, it should always be the case that we leverage that body of knowledge, that we use what we can from that space to solve business challenges. I think to be a little bit more specific and answer the question a little bit more directly, there's certainly some spaces where traditional research methods really don't work and really kind of cause for not great outcomes. So I think anytime we're trying to understand a journey or a consumer map, there's so much context that is there that has to be considered. And I think behavioral science perspective is really critical in terms of being able to look more holistically at what that space and what that journey actually looks for. Similarly, if we're trying to think about, what are the product attributes that we can leverage, that's something that consumers themselves are often not aware of, and traditional research methods really struggle to get at the crux of, well, what is the thing about the product or service that is actually motivating? And lastly, and maybe most importantly, I think purchase intent really needs to be reshifted and reworked with a behavioral lens. We can look, I'm from Canada, and if we think about, in Canada currently, cannabis has just become legalized for recreational use. If we were to just ask people, do you intend to use? That's going to be wildly unpredictive because there's so much shift in context, in social norms around cannabis use. And I think in this type of a space, what we really have to do is leverage what we know about people, the types of things that influence people, and how in such a shifting space, that type of intent just won't at all be productive. So you have to bring in the behavioral science piece.
Excellent. I'm going to call an audible as a great answer to that question and very thorough. I think I want to go off script a little bit and open this up to our two folks that are on the client side on the panel and ask, does your organization see it that way, that anything behavioral is necessarily best answered with behavioral research? My guess is that there are times inside a client organization where you think, hey, traditional research techniques are fine, and then there are other cases where there's a realization that, wow, we really need to do something different here. And it may or may not be the case, but I'm just opening up to see if you have any different experiences inside the organization.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about influencing in the C-suite, like they're not thinking about it in terms of techniques or methodologies. They're looking for more predictive answers or ways that we can get our business result faster or more efficiently. And so I think, it pulls through more in that lens because they're never going to be super interested in the details of how, just as long as predicting the what is improving.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would say behavioral is great for kind of in the moment and how people are reacting. But I think traditional, what it provides is kind of the why. I mean, heart rate increasing and eye tracking and facial coding, those are great measures and they're super important, but they don't necessarily tell you maybe why somebody was attracted to something. I mean, for that, you kind of still need to go into some more qualitative research.
Excellent. Excellent answers. I think it's very instructive. I'm going to turn to Kevin now, one guy we haven't heard from yet, and just ask, how has behavioral science and the growth of the behavioral science industry sort of changed what your organization does?
So using behavioral science in our business, a music studio that creates music and sound, actually makes us more of who we are. Our North Star as a company is what we call sonic humanism, the idea that life should be richer and simpler through the power of sound. And the opposite of that is what we call sonic trash, sound that is degrading to experiences and humans, and just sound that's out there that's really bad. The credit card chip reader, it's not good. It's not the kind of thing you want to be hearing when you leave a store. All of these things are important to how people respond to experiences. So it makes us more of who we are because if that's our highest calling, then we have to have the insight to back up our work. We have to continue to be leaders in bringing new insights to the world around how music and sound is affecting people and how it's important to consider music and sound at the forefront of experience development, not as an afterthought.
Excellent, excellent. Let me turn one to Brian too. And Brian, you were talking about behavioral science. Maybe some of the techniques don't get you to the why as much as some of the traditional stuff. What do you see as in your organization? What are some of the benefits that you are getting, if there are other benefits other than just being predictive, to using behavioral techniques, behavioral research?
Yeah, softball question in front of this crowd. No, I mean, I see the benefits of behavioral as kind of three categories. I think there's probably more than that, but they all kind of work together. It's engagement, it's in the moment, and I think it's subconscious. So right now, I'm in the process of testing some new ad formats for our Turner networks. And we don't have, norms to compare them against because they're brand new ad formats. But two, I want to know exactly how somebody is reacting in the moment that they see this ad format, like across this 30-second spot, or maybe it's shorter, or maybe it's longer, or maybe it's not a traditional spot at all. So I need to know, are they confused by it? Did they even see the element on screen? Are they smiling? Does it perceive that they like it? And then I'll also pair that with kind of more traditional surveying on the back end to see how those two things align. And I think that's really where, pretty much all powerful research comes from, is when you're pairing multiple methods together to get kind of like a holistic picture of it.
Great. Any other experiences on the panel in terms of benefits or other things that you didn't hear Brian mention to us?
Well, from the man-made music perspective, we see combining different methodologies together as being really important in our work. We use both implicit association testing as well as conscious data, and we pull that together, and it provides really, really powerful insights. We're able to tap into the database norms that Sentient has to understand if the levels we're seeing meet the quality standards that we're hoping for, and how it's affecting behavior. And we get to use the survey questions and the open ends to understand how it's going to motivate brand behavior on a conscious level and how it makes people feel. And for us, we're using research in two ways. We're using research to inform creative decisions. So we're creating these sonic experiences for our clients and their audience experiences all the time. And very often we're bringing the research capability into the creative development process, and we're assessing options before anything is finalized. So it allows us to then take what we've learned as one input to the process and inform decisions about revisions and finalization, so that not only have we created the most powerful work, but our clients have confidence to shop it around. The second way that we're using this kind of research is by bringing new insights about how people are affected by sound. We did a study with Sentient that's rooted in this sonic humanism spectrum, this spectrum of emotional appeal of sounds, and we looked at it. But we looked at these sounds both implicitly as well as in a max diff experiment, and we found an 86% correlation between how sound makes someone feel on a subconscious level and whether or not they desire to have that experience or avoid it in the future. So what that's saying is that if you're putting sound into an experience and all things are equal and it's a bad sound, there's an 86% chance that you're going to probably want to avoid that again, if at all possible.
So what I'm sort of hearing, could be wrong, but sort of what I'm hearing is that some of the things that are providing a lot of benefit and getting a lot of momentum with clients or inside organizations are metrics or tools that provide metrics that we couldn't otherwise get, right? So I heard a little bit of facial coding. I heard a lot of. Is there any opportunity that you've seen where behavioral science can replace the traditional? Because I heard Brian say, "Gosh, we have this behavioral stuff, but it's good to check it against the traditional stuff." I know there's a lot of work that we do at Sentient where we go in and recommend, okay, we can get this answer behaviorally. And just minutes before this panel discussion, I was on the phone with a client. We were recommending something behavioral, and they said, well, can we also do purchase intent? And I said, well, you could ask the question, but what happens when the behavioral experiment proves that A is the answer and your purchase intent says that C is the answer? What are you going to do then? Good question. So do you see that as a problem? Can you comment on, is there a chance that at some point that behavioral, the tools and techniques that we've seen out in the lobby today could replace the traditional techniques entirely? Or is our momentum really going to be new tools and techniques is the way that we get in the door with behavioral, and maybe someday people will say, well, gosh, maybe we shouldn't ask so many questions directly?
In our work, we find that contradiction to be the most exciting moment, because we see the contradiction in the data and we want to ask the data why, and we scrutinize what we've learned until we understand the real insight. And actually knowing that we see those conflicts between the implicit data and the conscious data quite often tells us that both are important to solving the challenge.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so in my piece of work, this super sexy topic, we were looking at the impact of GDPR on legal cookie language claimer disclaims. Yeah, at the bottom of your website. Oh yeah. So we're working with Aaron at Sentient on it, and so we used eye tracking and timed response to see how long people actually took to look at it and then read it as compared to the rest of the website. And that, that's something that you could never get with a traditional survey at all. I mean, you can't ask somebody, how long did you look at it? Well, I don't know, 3 seconds, 4 seconds? Well, it's probably like 0.8 seconds. But that's okay, because what we were doing was we were comparing like the language that our actual legal team came up with. It was very dry and boring. And my boss, Natasha, and I, we kind of rewrote it in more human language friendlier. And it turns out people looked at it slightly longer. It seemed like they may have actually understood it a little bit better. So that was a huge win for us, that we could prove out through behavioral methods that, I think that it was extra bolstered through that kind of additional information rather than just a traditional survey technique.
Yep. Well, I experienced the same thing. The onus is on this group to prove out that behavioral experimentation, behavioral science is in some cases or in most cases superior to questions. But I do see that these new tools, these new techniques are giving us a way in with organizations that are otherwise resistant. So let me direct a question at Sarah from Keurig Dr. Pepper. What do you think it will be that will enable the next wave of growth as we try to mainstream behavioral science within the industry? Is it artificial intelligence? Is it or machine learning? Is it just client education? What do you think is going to enable the next jump on the S-curve for this?
I'm a big fan of the bundling strategy or Trojan horse. Old habits die really hard, and I think that we're so stuck in our rut of asking and asking and asking and not curious enough about the things we can observe that I think ultimately, I think of the analogy of like the landline phone, eventually you get to the point where you still have it keeping around, but it's because you've got your internet package that's so much better. And I feel like that metaphor potentially for behavioral measures is important because they seem newer or different, but intriguing. And if you kind of like bundle them in with what people know and then sort of help them see the awesomeness, get more comfortable, and then scale, I think that's key. I think it's interesting, the AI part of the question, there's a lot happening in the space. The waters are churning. And I feel like for those of us who have been involved in that earlier, you see some of the older players are suddenly having a lot of competition. Ultimately, though, I think that the notion of it, of thinking about all the available unstructured data that people just put out there, I mean, that's a behavior, writing reviews or putting your thoughts out there on the internet, is just there for the understanding. And why wouldn't we try to figure out what that emotion is and what business impact we could have if we really address that? Sometimes you've got the phenomena of the fewer comments, but there's a lot of emotion there. And it's almost like the unstated needs that you can address. And I think there's just so much goodness to be had, but it takes a fortitude and a persistence sometimes in the face of people just being like, well, would you have the top $2? What's the top $2? So.
Great. Raj?
If I can add to that, I think one of the things that will really propel behavioral science forward is a more nuanced I want to say more nuanced, and at the same time, a broader understanding of behavioral science being beyond tools and techniques. It's beyond an implicit tool or beyond a nudge. If we think about psychology, what psychology does and what psychology has been founded on is actually understanding human behavior, understanding the drivers and the motivators. And so actually at Fresh Squeezed Ideas, we are a mainly qualitative firm who uses behavioral science. So I think once we can understand the actual power of behavioral science beyond just a few particular metrics, I think that's when we can get into the place of there are other ways of answering the why than our current traditional methods. And there's another space for behavioral science other than metrics and measurement of very specific indicators.
One of the ways I always try to circle it back is thinking about what else could I observe? Like, what else could I take in that would potentially add? And it's kind of a messy habit because it adds a little bit to your work at first, but in the spirit of being curious and a perpetual learner, just thinking about, like, what else is there? What else could I possibly open up that would help me get better answers or help me tell a richer story? And I think that piece for me is sort of like, what is the observable that I can get to? And we're often in too much of a hurry for it, so it kind of takes a certain discipline, I think.
Mm-hmm. I'm still hoping for, like super science fiction-y tech, right? Like, the less devices that are attached to your body, the more natural your response is going to be. I think we all probably agree with that. So like, I'm just hoping for like the box you put on your TV, and it just looks at you and it knows where your eyes are going. It can read your pulse from like your forehead veins or whatever. It uses X-rays to see the EEG stuff, and don't at me with that's not what X-rays do. But I'm just waiting for just like the next technological advance.
I'm going to be tough on you guys. I'm not asking easy questions. I want this to be a memorable panel, so I'm going to ask this question. Because what I've heard is, I think I hear a lot of honesty here around, some of the difficulty of, difficulty of having this integrate and be the methodologies, have these be the methodologies of choice inside of client organizations. And I've heard Trojan horse, I've heard new tools and techniques, and certainly want to be predictive, but it's hard to know the why. Like there's some challenges that I see here. And so let's assume for a moment that the vast advantage of some of the behavioral science that we use is predictive validity. So let me ask a tough question especially for the client folks, but it's open to anybody. How interested is your organization behaviorally at being more predictive? Do they do the market response analytics to know whether the research was right or wrong? Do they track to see if there's a correlation between the results and what the innovation finally turned out 2 years later? Like, how much is the organization, does that really work? Like, wow, that was way more predictive. Let's do this in the future and let's quit doing that. Like, is that really something?
Who doesn't want to be more right more of the time, I guess? There's definitely that angle, but I think that when it comes to prediction, many of us have had that experience where the ad tests well, but it doesn't sell the units that we thought. And if you're just in a world where it's like, oh yeah, what was the, what's the $9, or whatever it is that's the measure you're addicted to, ultimately getting that ability to land it does the insights industry a lot of good. We've been maybe leaning into stuff that wasn't predictive for too long. And I think that ultimately, it's our job to kind of clean up some messes that we started. Right.
I'd answer your question with 100% they're interested in being more predictive. So, one of the things that we work on is, bringing together new apps and new app development. So we'll do like consumer co-creation, something very like not behavioral researchy, but then we'll create a couple concepts out of that co-creation sessions, and then we will test those from a behavioral methodology perspective. And from that, it gives us a better idea of which of these concepts has a better chance of success in the live market. And if we're wrong, that's a lot of money that we ended up being wrong about. So yeah, my stakeholders are very much interested in the behavioral aspects of prediction.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let me flesh out what I said a little bit more because I don't want to leave it in a, we've made a bit of a mess and we need to clean it up. But when you think about how much money in our industry is potentially spent doing ad and brand health tracking, which ultimately can be really rear view mirror and really snapshot in time, and we spend a lot of money on it. Like if you were able to free up those resources to do things that were more predictive, you'd have this huge amount of funds that your organization cares a lot about. Those are big dollars that you could potentially use to drive your business in a much more predictive way. That's kind of where I feel like there's huge battles to be won.
And I asked that question not to be facetious. It seems like, well, who doesn't want to be more predictive? That's almost a silly question. But the reason I said behaviorally is because I came from organizations that that did not do any forensics on the research because there are so many factors involved and variables in the marketplace that unless you're going to do some pretty major market response modeling, you don't really know what the correlation was between your research and the results. So there's a lot of, where I'm from, there were a lot of people saying, yeah, oh, we want it to be great. And there was frustration when the research said something would work and it didn't, especially if it was a big risk sort of a decision. But it didn't seem like there were a lot of people that knew exactly what the correlation of a top 2-box score was to marketplace results. So that's why I asked the question there. But let me ask this, and maybe we've covered some of it. And if we have, maybe there's some other nuances to the question that we haven't covered. And it's the challenges that are inherent in some of the, or sort of implied in some of the answers you've had before, the challenges to greater adoption of behavioral research more broadly. Like this is obviously a group of kindred spirits. I mean, everybody on the stage and everybody in the audience, we're all sort of on the same team. But there are some organizations where I'm sure there's competency issues within the department. There's, what do the brand marketers want to hear? What do the executives want to hear? So, thinking more broadly, what are some of the biggest challenges you think for this group with, someday this room should be 5 times this size. Someday this should be the mainstream, and I think you guys have sort of implied that in yours. But what are some of the challenges to that? And it could be, education within the client. It could be maybe we just don't have the right techniques. Maybe it's too clumsy. What do you think? Big challenges or obstacles?
Well, I'm going to maybe talk a bit about some of the ways that where it is a challenge, but more than where it's not a challenge, because I'm in the position of going into my clients, some really big brands, and trying to convince them that bringing research into the creative development process, which is a cost, is worthwhile. And I end up sitting with the market intelligence people, the folks in this room who are responsible for insights within their companies. And so one of the challenges is that the kind of work that we bring to the table is a little bit complicated to explain. And we have to go through a lot of discussion. We have to share demos and explain it. And sometimes there's questions about indexes and benchmarks. But once we get through that conversation, which takes a little bit of time, people are super motivated by it. And it's a differentiator for us because no one else that we know of in our industry has this capability. So there is a challenge in education and understanding, even with professionals who play in the space, if they haven't done this before. But once they do it for the first time, we find great appreciation for the value of the work that comes out of it.
I think an approach that works really well is that ability to show the wins and show what's possible, and to do that in the most compelling, three-dimensional way that you can. But keep it short and keep it brief, bright, and brilliant. And ideally, that helps people lean in, because otherwise, if it seems like a lot of learning or just too much detail, I think people tend to lean away.
Yeah.
That's why I like my bundling Trojan horse approach.
For sure. I think a major challenge is eyes rolling back in their heads when you're kind of going through statistical significance. Just try not to use that word in a presentation to like non-research people, really, because but honestly, I don't want to step on any future questions about how to overcome these challenges, but just try to make it more interesting, whether you're appealing to wins, whether that's like the project success or actual connections to profits or increased revenue. I think one of the challenges that in being in research we often face is people think of us as a cost center. If we can kind of realign that to, you hear ROI a lot as return on investment. Well, what if we can realign that to, return on insight? I think helping to change perceptions of what research can be and can do and what it offers the company can go a long way.
I guess one more thought on this is I think it's really important for us as researchers to turn our research skills internally on the people we're selling into. So yeah, we spend a lot of time thinking about empathizing with our consumers and our humans in the outside world, but the people who make decisions about the market research budget and the people who sit at the executive leadership table, I feel like really having a good sense of what makes them tick and what they're motivated by and how they behave becomes like a really important tool that you use in trying to sell in things that are new and different and better.
Anything else? Any other? I want to open up, since Brian mentioned it, not stepping on any toes about how to overcome challenges or objections. Anything else from Raj or Kevin or Sarah or Brian on any other techniques or things that you've used to help overcome some of those challenges?
I think trying to sell behavioral science into our clients sort of echo what I've heard here. And I think the main thing is, of course, at the higher level, people are not interested in the methods, and the how doesn't really matter. It's more of the what are we going to get out of this? So I think it's a nice trying to find a balance between explaining the necessity of it, but really focusing on the value and tying it back to what for our clients are their KPIs, what are they being measured against. And as a behavioral scientist, I can get very excited and I just want to be all in the weeds and educate everyone about the value and the beauty of behavioral science. But at the end of the day, I think being able to really tie that back to business objectives, which it naturally does tie back to, but just highlighting on that piece, I think has been what's helped us to be able to sell it in.
Yeah, I'd agree that from the perspective of having to even prove the value of what my company does in totality, having this kind of data that demonstrates the impact that music and sound can have when done well has been very helpful to our approach to engaging potential clients.
Yeah, totally. One thing that I've learned is being in corporate strategy, we don't have salespeople asking us with like a direct request. I came from CNN ad sales research, so they wanted to know ratings, reach, impressions, whatever, and I could quick get it to them, and that was the transaction, right? But now in a corporate strategy, consumer insights role, I need to help land my work to push it out, to bring people in, and one method that we found works really well is video. So we'll create a video of the process and the work as we're doing it. And it's not video of us sitting in our cubicles or whatever, poring over a spreadsheet. No, that's super boring. I mean, it does kind of depend on the project.
With the right soundtrack, it might be all right.
Yeah. I'll get Kevin in on it.
Thanks.
No sonic trash. But yeah, I mean, so a short 3-minute video, make it easily shareable. It really helps land with our internal stakeholders, but then our external stakeholders, because then you can march it around at presentations and conferences like this, and people are like, oh, hey, that boring person stopped talking, now I get to watch a video. That's awesome. So it's really helped out, and then you try not to be a boring person too, but like I said, again, getting a little bit sexier with your research, linking it to actual profits or what this actually means for the company, like Raj said as well, will really pick up eyes and ears.
Do you have an example of your video analogy?
Oh yeah, right. Okay, so last year we did co-creation sessions with consumers on new ad concepts. So we did in market in Austin and Chicago. Whoop, whoop. Last year, and so we actually had our video crew. I'll admit, I'm biased. I work for a broadcasting company, right? So we had some of our film crews come up and actually tape it. You can probably hire a college, video college film grad or whatever to do it for $50 or something, or a Subway sandwich. I don't know. so we had our guys, and the quality was pretty great, which helped for sure. But it was super interesting, at least to people who don't work in our group, to see the process in action and to see real people talk about advertising and how they feel about it. I mean, that's something that I think like our executives don't see a lot of. I mean, they talk to a lot of other media professionals about it, and it's all kind of high-minded over sushi and talking about airplane status or whatever. But hearing real people talk about it, it can be enlightening.
So are you guys typical within your organizations, both to Sarah and Brian? So you're obviously advocates of what we're all doing here, and Brian's even made videos about it, so we know that he's an advocate. Would you say you're typical among your peers in the organization, or are you a little more adept and a little more of an advocate for the behavioral approach? Do you have some more traditionalists where you in your function?
I would say we have a mix of people who, kind of stay in their lanes versus drive all over the road, and I'm probably a drive all over the road. I think there's so much out there right now that's happening in the insights field, and I think some people are more stimulated and some people are more overstimulated by it, possibly. I think ultimately when you're trying to sell in, for me, it's always that coming back to knowing what motivates my peers and thinking about what's going to be most digestible to get the right work done. A lot of times, I think in agents or in client-side organizations, there's a group or a COE. We don't have anything official like that, but that kind of goes out and monitors the landscape to come back and sort of report to the people who stayed at their desks and got stuff done while we were out carousing and learning new tricks. Ultimately, though, I think just having those good alliances across the board is helpful no matter who's in your organization.
Sure.
So I guess that's how I'd answer it.
Excellent. Well, I heard some really interesting things. Hopefully you did too, with the great panel up here, and I think the diverse perspectives and the diverse backgrounds really helped with that. I heard things. I heard that influence is a major is a major goal here. Is influencing so that we can get to the results, the business results that we're looking for, and that influence isn't always easy. I heard that no one cares about the how. They care about the what, and we're all sort of in love with the how, I think. I mean, if you walk around outside and look at the booths, there's a lot of how out there, and we all love it for the right reasons, because I think we're searching, as Sarah said, but then we want to take that and share that experience with people inside our organization and to a group of people that sometimes doesn't appreciate that. And so there have been some really cool strategies I've heard in terms of how you influence and how you bring that into your organization. So I think it's very interesting. We all agree that these are superior techniques that everyone is sharing at the conference here, yet we're still asking the question, wow, how do we mainstream this inside organizations, which is a real irony, isn't it? So I really appreciate the panel's patience with me as I sort of I went off script and made up some questions, but I was just trying to get to some of the bottom of how, as an organization, as an entire group, we can work as hard at the pull for behavioral science inside the client organizations as we do at, I'll call it the push, but the development of techniques, the innovation, and all of that. And I think that that's a bit of a missing piece, that if we can get that and get, then, like I said, this room will be multiples the size it is. This will be a mainstream conference, not something that we're all kindred spirits in the same in-group. But anyway, I appreciate the panel's time and excellent answers, and thank you guys for your time and engagement.